So today we'll be going over the comparative anatomy of the rat versus the earthworm. This is presented by
Push a marble.
Jonathan Cabangon.
Taylor Magana.
And Jenna Zambrano.
So in the introduction of what we'll be going over is we have the animal background for both the worm and the rat, is the taxonomic classifications, ecological habitats, etc. The animal anatomy, this includes like the digestive system, circulatory system, and just an overall comparison. Animal background, rat versus the earthworm. So we'll be going over the taxonomic classification. So as we can see, there are some similarities from the domain and kingdom. They're both eukarya, both Animalia, but in the rat is Norvegicus. The phylum is Chordata, the class is Mammalia, the order is Rodentia, family is Murad, genus is Rattus, species is Rattus norvegicus, as mentioned earlier in the name. For the earthworm or the Lumbrescus terrestris, it has a different phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species than that of the rat, and that is the phylum is Annelida, class is Clatella, order is Haplotaxida, family is Lumbricade, genus is Lumbrescus, and species is Lumbrescus terrestris. What is ecological habitat and what is abiotic and biotic? Ecological habitat is basically where an organism is residing and where it is able to function, how it's able to get its source of living and able to mate. Abiotic is non-living factors like soil and sunlight. Biotic is living organisms like plants and animals. Ecological habitat. So the ecological habitat for a rat would be, they live in a variety of habitats. This includes grasslands, forests, deserts, human homes like attics and basements, urban areas, among many others. As you can see in the picture, this is a rat in a subway in New York. So some abiotic factors would be they interact with rocks and man-made objects like subways and pesticides. Biotic factors would include it interacts with humans and vegetations. Examples include crops such as fruits and vegetables. So furthermore, on abiotic and biotic factors for the rat would be biotic factors would be they carry pathogens, and these pathogens include salmonella. This is what they carry. Abiotic factors would be water. They attract these easy sources, hence why in homes they go for the plumbing, and sunlight. They have extremely sensitive eyes, which is why they try to reside in areas like subways or in homes. And air would be an abiotic factor because the polluted air is developed in the secretory cell of hyperplasia in the airways. Ecological habitat for an earthworm. So their ecological habitat would be they reside in organic matter such as soil. Some abiotic factors include water, which is direct diffusion. So they need water to have moist skin in order to live. This ties in with soil because they need moist soil because this is where they live. So biotic factors would be animals. They're preyed on by most animals like rats, birds, frogs, etc. And in plants, this is a biotic factor because they help better the soil by breaking it down because this is what they eat.
I will now be explaining the food chains of both organisms. For rats, although they eat small organisms such as insects like grasshoppers, as shown on the image to the left, they are at the bottom of the food chain, which makes the rat susceptible to being food for numerous amount of predators such as birds, foxes, snakes, and much more. For earthworms, they eat organic matter, which is the soil they live in, but have to take caution of all predators such as insects, rats, birds, and many more because they lack defense mechanisms. For mating habits, rats tend to mate year-round, but mostly during warmer seasons, like in the summer, because they are warm-blooded animals, so these are the environments that they prefer, as it's their natural instinct to do so. Female rats give birth to 5 to 12 offspring at a time and reach sexual maturity in about 3 months. For earthworms, they can only start their offspring at 90 days old, where the sperm is exchanged via clatella, where the cocoon forms and they have hermaphrodite organs. In a diagram below, it talks about the life cycle of the earthworm. Now we'll be comparing the anatomy of rats and earthworms. I will start off with the digestive system in rats. They have all of the following: a mouth, esophagus, salivary glands, liver, pancreas, stomach, small and large intestines, but they don't have a gallbladder because they don't eat as much like humans do. so they don't need to store large amounts of bile.
The earthworm has even less things than the rat. It has a mouth, salivary glands, esophagus, and a small intestine, but they do not have a stomach, a large intestine, or liver, gallbladder, pancreas, or any sphincter muscles.
In the excretory and reproductive system, rats have kidneys, ureters, urinary bladders, and a urethra. In females, they have ovaries, cervix, vagina, fallopian tube, and the uterus, while in the males, they have testes, vas deferens, a prostate, epididymitis, penis, and a scrotum.
The earthworm, again, does not have as many things as the rat. It has no kidneys, but something alike called the nephridia. No uterus or urethra, but it does have urinary bladder. The male reproductive organs include testes, vas deferens, and prostate. The female reproductive organs are ovaries.
As shown on the figure to the right, the respiratory system of rats do include nasal cavities, a pharynx, a larynx, although they are not only used for respiration, but they are essential for communication, such as through squeaking. They do include a trachea, epiglottis, bronchi, and alveoli, but they are not present at birth. They develop after maturity. They have a diaphragm, and they breathe by inhaling and exhaling through the nose, and they are obligate nasal breathers. Rats inhale through their nostrils, with air being brought up through the pharynx as well as the trachea to reach the lungs. Oxygen is transported around the rat's body after it is put in the circulatory system. Their lungs are lined with alveoli, which assist in the absorption of oxygen. The alveoli also get rid of nitrogen and carbon dioxide, as well as gases they do not need. The diaphragm pushes air in and out of the lungs.
The earthworm has a very simple respiratory system because they do not have lungs or nose, which means they don't have a nasal cavity. They do have a pharynx, but they do not breathe through it. They only eat through it. The main way that they breathe is through diffusion, in which that means they breathe through their skin. This happens by air dissolving through their moist skin. The oxygen then enters the circulatory system. Then from there, the heart pumps the oxygenated blood throughout the body. And finally, the carbon dioxide dissolves out of the blood and back out through the skin. This also means that they don't have a larynx, trachea, epiglottis, bronchi, alveoli, or a diaphragm.
Once again, as shown on the figure to the right, the circulatory system of a rat is pulmonary rather than systematic. They have four heart chambers, the right and left atrium, as well as the right and left ventricles. The flow of blood in their bodies go in the reverse direction, and they go through the heart twice during one complete circuit. Their blood vessels include arteries, capillaries, and veins, and plasma, RBC, WBC, and platelets are found within the blood. Rats have a closed circulatory system, and RBC stands for red blood cells, which contain hemoglobin covered with proteins and lipids composed membranes. WBC stands for white blood cells, which contain granulocytes and non-granulocytes and are a major component of the rat's immune system in their bodies. Veins are vessels that carry deoxygenated blood from the capillaries to the heart. And as mentioned before, the heart has four chambers and it lies in the thoracic cavity. The right side of the heart supplies pulmonary circulation and the left side supplies systematic circulation. Each side of the heart contains an atrium, which receives the oxygenated blood and contracts and pushes blood into the ventricle.
Like the rat, the earthworm has a closed circulatory system. However, it has a systemic versus a pulmonary. This includes aortic arches, which are compared to hearts, and they have 5 of these that pump blood into the dorsal and ventral blood vessels. The dorsal blood vessels carry the blood to the front of the earthworm's body, while the ventral blood vessels carry the blood to the back of the earthworm's body.
So the nervous system of the rat includes a brain, which is the cortex of a rat's brain, which is smooth rather than wrinkled, as in humans. Their spinal cords are rigid and attached at the joints by cartilage. They have 12 cranial nerves that originate from their brain and brain stems, each with specific functions for their different senses in their bodies. They have 4 spinal nerves, which include 8 cervical, 13 thoracic, 6 lumbar, 4 sacral, and 3 coccygeal. The reflexive reactions or writing reactions send signals along a sensory neuron in the spinal cord, and signals are then passed to a motor neuron. An example of this being when a rat is placed in a supine position and given time to properly correct its standing. Locomotion is the ability to move from one place to another, and rats do have similar skeletal systems to humans, although they're much more agile and flexible, which allow them to easily fit into small cracks and spaces.
The nervous system of an earthworm is described in the figure below, where we can see the brain, the segmental nerves, and nerve cord. And the locomotion of the earthworm is described by having circular and longitudinal muscles, as well as bristles called setae. They extend out the setae from its body to grab the soil, and once the setae is anchored in the soil, they use their longitudinal muscles to contract and move forward. Once it has moved forward, the back of the body is anchored to contract the circular muscles to then lengthen its body. And they have a hydrostatic skeleton, which allows them to dig into the soil without being crushed.
So the general comparisons of rat and an earthworm, they do have structures that are similar. So they have similar features in their digestive system, such as their mouths and esophagus. Unique features, the worm has 5 aortic arches, which pump blood into the dorsal and ventral blood vessels. They also have hermaphrodite organs, which includes both male and female reproductive organs. Rats can get diseases through their nostrils and like the respiratory system, which makes them prone to diseases and infections of the respiratory tract due to contact with airborne bacteria. And female rats do not undergo menstrual cycles. However, they do undergo an estrous cycle, which results in the reabsorption of the uterine lining rather than shedding, like in menstrual cycles. In this phylogenetic tree, it shows that worms, earthworms, and rats do share a common yet distant ancestor. So the evolutionary history of a rat and an earthworm. So rats are deuterostomes and bilateral. Earthworms are protostomes and bilateral. And what caused this is the Cambrian period, which was a period of global warming. There were no development in predators, and this phylogenetic tree shows how they gained other attributes.